Welcome into another edition of the Illini Inquirer Podcast with Mike LaTulip, our basketball analyst. And we got a lot to chat about today. Kofi Cockburn's suspension, another exhibition game for Illinois without a few key veterans, giving Brad Underwood everything he wanted for ammo in practice this week, as well as an NCAA case with Oklahoma State. I'm interested to get Mike's thoughts a little bit on just everything going on with the NCAA, especially with Kofi Cockburn. And we got the start of regular season on Tuesday for Illinois without their best player, Kofi Cockburn. But Mike, what's up, man? We were just talking off the air, just a lot going on in the sports world right now. And college basketball is right in the thick of it as well.
A lot going on. That's right. You know, whether it's NBA, NFL, college football, you know, Alabama, the whole Alabama scenario. There's a lot going on, but you know, the Illini specifically, you get the news with Kofi, and it's tough because when you have the NIL now, then in retrospect, it seems like small potatoes. But you know, the rules are the rules when they're in place, and I think what ends up happening is you try to do the whole retrospective thing, but if they were to grant Kofi a pass, then you kind of set the precedent of, hey, how far back can you go? You know, well, I did this a year before the NIL thing. Am I abstained? And I think oftentimes, you know, amateurism's amateurism, and they kind of have to make that call, no matter if it was. I truly believe that if was NIL July 1st.
Yeah, July 1st, and
if it happened June 28th, they still would have done it, because it's just, you can't, once you open up that can of worms of when it happens, and if you're like, hey, it was a week before. You know, it's unfortunate, because I truly believe in the moment when he did it, he didn't have any plans on coming back to Illinois. So it is unfortunate how it all went down. And I think you look at next steps in terms of, he's out for the next 3 games. So that's Jackson State, Arkansas State, that's Marquette. If you want to be a glass half full guy, these are premium opportunities to see Coleman Hawkins play at the 5 a fair amount, and then to see Omar Payne really get his feet wet, because I think in these 2 exhibition games, it seemed like he was in the process of trying to do that, and maybe this gives him the opportunity to gain a little bit of confidence. But I'll be curious to see how they manage with him out. I mean, I probably want Coleman at the 5 starting, and then maybe you obviously keep DeMonte in the starting lineup, or however you mix and match it, but you want to at least keep that rotation at the 5 succinct, because if you go Coleman at the 4, if you go Omar at the 5, now what do you do subbing back in? So that's how I look at it, but I do think it's valuable minutes for those guys, and you may see some leave and BVB, like spare minutes. You may see that, especially early on with some of these games. You want to run your, Coleman Hawkins or those guys into the ground. And if there is foul trouble, you need to have a contingency plan there. But going off of just the IUP game, that whole game plan was for Kofi Cockburn. If you go back and watch it, if you saw it in real time, the whole game plan was for Kofi Cockburn. And now it's going to be Andre Curbelo. So coming off of a 10 turnover game, one that he probably, in his mind, he probably didn't play up to his standards. And, he's going to have his work cut up for him in these first couple of games, playing against teams that will be completely focused on him. So it will be fascinating to see how they manage it and who steps up. But I do think the silver lining here is that they're, the table's set for a few guys to gain a little bit of confidence playing some extended minutes.
Yeah, Mike, with you, I don't want to focus as much on like the NCAA, I guess, decision, because I think you and I agree. He broke a rule and I was paying the price for it. I understand everybody upset about whether they hold teams accountable, though we saw Oklahoma State maybe be held really accountable. And we'll see what happens with LSU and Kansas and all those schools. But you make an interesting point of how the coaching staff deals with this, because I think the one concern is if Kofi were out, say, 8 games, was all of a sudden you're resetting your team 8 games into the season. 3 games against lower opponents for 2 of them, then Marquette for 1. You're still going to have several games before you hit Big Ten play, your first couple of Big Ten games, where you have Kofi as a part of this group. So how do you limit, how much disruption happens as a team tries to to gain its camaraderie, its chemistry, all those things.
Yeah, well, the good news is it's not like he's suspended from all team activities. So they'll probably be still working him in business as usual and practice. But at the same time, you have to prepare with the guys that you're going to have on the floor. So there's a balance and a give and take there where when you're running scout team, if we're going to have Coleman starting at the 5, he's going to be in there. He's going to be in there at the 5 and seeing a lot of the actions that Jackson's running, Arkansas State's running, Marquette's running. But you talk about disruption. I think that's where that balance needs to be found, is how can we, I guess, mesh this in a way that is very similar to how we would do it with Kofi, so that when we do get back, you're not reinventing the wheel again. Right. So there is, that's the challenge. I think you have Coleman Hawkins that played limited minutes last year. You have Omar Payne, who was a 15-minute a game guy, but now he's in a new scenario, a new setting. And I think like I said, there's a lot of growth to be had from those guys. And I'm excited to see how they do it, but that's what makes coaching fun. I think they like the chess match, and they like, being able to show that you can win in different ways with different guys. And but it's a huge confidence boosting opportunity. For a lot of these guys that down the road, you never know what happens. I always say, with injury, with suspension, crazier things have happened. So, having these guys confident is huge moving forward.
Yeah, you're hoping the silver lining could be that, hey, if Kofi's in foul trouble, even a couple of games, that these guys kind of know what it takes. And we did see good from Coleman Hawkins, right during these exhibition games. We didn't see a lot of Omar Payne, which is, given that they knew this was probably coming, I think a little bit of a concern. So what do you think of those guys in these first 3 games? 2 against smaller opponents, 1 against a Marquette team it looks a lot different than last year, even the coach and losing their 5 top leading scorers.
Yeah, I think Coleman Hawkins, I've really, really been impressed with him. I think he's a pro. The fire that he plays with, I mentioned it. I talked about it in the film breakdown. He's a very heady player. He's not just a big body out there that kind of floats around the arc. He's smart with his cuts. He's smart with his box outs. I mentioned it. I think I tweeted it during the game. He really is like a technician with his box outs. It's really, really impressive how quickly he can go from shot up, look at his guy, go hit, guy's not crashing, I'm crashing. Like, it's little stuff like that where he's not a very reactionary player. He initiates a lot of the contact. He initiates a lot of the cuts that he makes, and it's not always predicated off what the defense is giving him. He goes and asserts himself, which is really cool to see. And then with Omar, I think he's a guy that if you're gonna move him from 9 minutes a game to 15 minutes a game in Kofi's absence, you're still not asking much of him. And I do think with a guy like him, it's not like it's a point guard who now has to go from, we don't want him handling the ball the entire game, to now you have a lack of point guard depth, and then all of a sudden he's got to handle it. Like, that's a much bigger problem than a 5-man that's going to have to be in a little bit more. So I think he'll hold his own, because it's what his role is. His role is rebounding. It's crashing the glass. It's protecting the rim. It's being really good at both offensive and defensive ball screen coverages. So I think he hasn't shown a ton in these first 2 exhibition games, but for what he is, he doesn't really have to. And with a guy like him, you can insert him and see that uptick in minutes and not be worried about, is he going to kill us out there? Because he quite frankly isn't really asked to do a whole lot.
Yeah. Plus he's got experience at a high level, right? So it's not like he's some new guy from a low level. He played at Florida, a pretty good team behind a pretty good big man in Colin Castleton. So, all right. The exhibition game, I was sitting there on the sidelines. We have a close game, against a really good Division II team. And Mike, you hit it, that they were going to be very, very good. But it was everything Brad Underwood wanted, because he didn't want his team feeling too good about himself. And now he has so much film to go back on. But I do think that game showed the value of Trent Frazier and DeMonte Williams, especially, and then Austin Hutcherson out with a tailbone. And it sounds like, DeMonte was going through a workout. Mike, I saw him. He looked like he'll be fine. And then Trent came back into the game after that shoulder injury. Sounds like he's practicing this week. Austin Hutcherson might be out for a little more time. So that you hate it for that kid who just can't stay healthy. But there was a couple ways I thought you saw that you missed Trent Frazier and DeMonte Williams. One was that you have nobody else to handle the ball really when Trent is out without Andre Curbelo. So his usage was sky high and there was an impact of that, but also defensively, right? I mean, big guards like they really hurt Illinois. So what did you see that on those ends that Illinois really lacked with those guys out?
Yeah, the DeMonte Williams thing was interesting. It almost felt like a Dak Prescott deal where it was like, he's out there, he looks good, but maybe they're just holding him over for the season opener. But yeah, I mean, you missed a lot with those two guys out, especially on the defensive end. I mean, D2 team or not, you don't want to give up 41 points in the second half. You just don't. And they really did it. They had a certain physicality about them that I think is thwarted a little bit with guys like Trent Frazier and DeMonte Williams. But I'll make this point: the starting lineup came out flat. Offensively, they looked fine, but defensively, they looked flat. And Curbelo, Plummer, there were a few guys out there that were getting hit on screens, and we talk about it ad nauseum. The one guy that doesn't, and I could have put 4 clips in here in the 3 minutes that he played or whatever he played. He does not get screened, and it covers up so much defensively to where now your big men don't have to help on ball screen coverages. Now your big men don't have to help off of pin downs, off of flares. Like, it's not getting screened. We used to get graded out in practice when I was at Illinois on it. And it was called, you got points, deducted a point, given a point when they broke down the practice film on getting screened. They called it GPS. Like, good players don't get screened. So Gross had a lot of acronyms.
I'm seeing this too, Mike, with Lonzo Ball with the Bulls. Like, that guy and Caruso too. Like, those guys don't get screened. I just want to throw that in there. It's a big part of the reason they've improved so much.
It's huge, and I think it's such an underrated aspect of Trent's game, and maybe it's not underrated. I talk about it every practice, so maybe it's rated where it should be, but it is underrated from just as a casual fan. It's things that you don't notice, and you talk about Lonzo. There are certain things that make guys really, really good defenders, and Trent has a great mix of physicality. He has a great mix of, like I said, not getting screened. And then he just has that dog to him. Yep. And guys feed off of that. Guys really, really feed off of that. And I thought, when he went out, I actually thought that the freshmen that came in gave a little bit of boost, on that end. I thought they were playing like their hair was on fire, which is good defensively. You don't want to do that offensively. But they were flying around. They're playing hard. Their bodies on the floor, and I thought that kind of gave them a little bit more of a jolt defensively, because I showed it in the Alfonso Plummer breakdown. He gets screened, and it's partly what happened to Adam Miller last year. And he got better at it by the end of the year. And I'm hoping that the more that Plummer is around Trent Frazier than just by osmosis, he can he can find a way to not get screened like that. I thought Curbelo was better at it. He still got hit on some screens, and I have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure Curbelo left his feet to block shots or contest shots like 10 or 11 times in the game. And I made the point last year on a podcast where, for our TBT team, I asked, I'm like, how many guys have blocked a shot? Guards, how many of you guys have blocked a 3? And like, no one raised their hand. I was like, yeah, exactly. So stop. I get contesting the shot, but there's ways to do it without completely leaving your feet. Trent ended up getting a blocked 3-point shot 2 games later, but the numbers still are in favor of when you leave your feet to block 3-point shots, especially if you're rotating, if you're out of position, they get you for that. They always, and it happened to him twice. And those are like the little plays throughout the game where Trent's really good at it. Trent has a way of contesting, but Trent's never really out of position to have to fly and try to contest. He's always in position. So, and DeMonte as well, like they both are so good at utilizing their strengths defensively, but they bring a certain toughness that I think, it'll be really good for some of these other guys to continue to bring that as well. Because there may be other games where Trent and DeMonte are out. You never know. So you don't want to just have it be an automatic, well, Trent and DeMonte are out. So, our per 100 possessions defensively just went up 10 points. Right. It shouldn't be like that. So, but I thought that, Brad Underwood touched on it. This could not have been a better dress rehearsal. Could not have been.
Thrilled. He was giddy after this. His team didn't play well, and he loved it, Mike.
I don't blame him. I think everybody, of course, you win 114-50, then everybody's cheering. We're the best offense in the country, and we're this or that. But as a coach, it's just kind of like, what do we really know about our team? Right. We know we can beat St. Francis. We know that we can beat. But IUP, they brought and I'll break it down in the film a little bit, but their whole game plan was to stop Kofi, which goes to show you how good Kofi is, because he had 21 and 8. But their whole game plan, if you were Coleman Hawkins, if you were Jacob Grandison, if you were anybody that is throwing a high-low pass from the top of the key, we are not guarding you. We are sinking into the paint, and we're making you take a second-guessed three-point shot from the top of the key. And you saw about 8 of them that Grandison and Hawkins took throughout the game, where it was like, should I take this? I'm kind of wide open. All right, yeah, I'll shoot it. And I think those particular threes, I think they were like 2 for 8 on. So
those are different, right? Than like stepping into one in rhythm. You
don't practice those. Yeah. If you're in practice, if you're on the gun, if you're getting passed to by a coach, you're not standing there and hesitating, standing straight up, looking around, getting back down. Like, you don't. And I thought it was a heck of a game plan from IUP, where it's like, no, you're going to beat us with second-guess three-point shots from the top of the key from guys that, Grandison was 41% last year, Hawkins 2 for 13 or 3 for 13. But at the same time, I think in their mind, they're like, we'll take the 35% three-point shot over 60% with Kofi any day. And you just try to play the percentages, and it hurt Illinois. They still wanted to throw it in, and it got a couple of high-low passes broken up. So I thought they had a great game plan. I thought their guards, IUP's guards, like, those are really talented guards. Forget D2. Like, those are Division I guards.
Yeah, they looked like a mid-major team in the back, like a backcourt, right? Like front court they didn't, but like, backcourt, those are kind of the guys you played at Wright State that were really, really effective.
Those are mid-major guards for sure, and some of them transferred from mid-majors, so it's not entirely surprising, but I thought it was a great look. I think it was a great learning moment for a few of the guys on the team. I loved Kofi's patience was incredible, and it really is. I think he was maybe 6 points, 3 for 3 in the first half, or whatever it ended up being. Didn't force anything. And then in the second half, he had his moment where he had that stretch where he just absolutely dominated the game. And I think that's something that goes a little bit under the radar at times. When you're a guy like that, it isn't just having to dominate for a full 40 minutes. You want to do that, but sometimes you can assert your dominance in a 10-minute window and the game is over. And that's really what happened. And despite Andre Curbelo being a little bit loose with the ball, and we'll get into that later. And I have a lot of talking points on Andre Curbelo, but there are certain things that Kofi really helped them weather the storm. So plenty of things that you can take from these exhibition games, especially when you have guys down and who's going to step up. And Brad Underwood has to be pleased, not necessarily with the effort, but with what he can work with in practice and moving forward. And they do have, I always, as a viewer, we hate the layoff between second exhibition and opener. But as a coach and as a player, I think it's an opportunity to reset and recalibrate and say, here's what we have, and how can we work on it in these next 10 days to shore it up and be ready for the opener.
I think this game, the exhibition game, was kind of like a reminder of what you could have been without Kofi, without Trent, without DeMonte, right? And have all those guys back for an extra year is it's pretty amazing, because if you didn't have Kofi, you probably lose that game. And it's just a reminder of like how much he lifts this team and how high your floor is going to every game that he is on the court, which will be interesting the first 3 games to see how they deal with that. Before we get into Curbelo, because nobody had his hands all over that game, for better or worse, than Andre Curbelo. You mentioned some of the freshmen. RJ Melendez had about a 4-possession stretch on defense. I was like, yes, engaged using his athleticism, using his length. And I just continue to be impressed by Luke Goody, even if he's not putting up points. Like Mike, he just had this one moment, maybe I'm making too much of it, where the veterans were rattled. Like Curbelo's having a bad time. Kofi's frustrated he's not getting the ball, understandably so. And Luke Goody huddles up the team, grabs Curbelo, like gives him a pat on the butt, and just like gives a fist pump to Kofi. And I'm like, ooh, that's different for a freshman. And just the way he's playing is he's not playing like a true freshman right now. So just thoughts on those two guys.
I'll start with Goody, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. Because there are some points that I want to make about freshman leadership. Because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And I'll start with a guy like Luke Goody, who you can just tell. And you could go with the quarterback thing. He's a natural born leader. And when you come onto a team as a freshman with experience, guys that are experienced, 2, 3, 4, in Trent DeMonte's case, 5 years on the team. Okay, how do I manage this? I know that I have leadership capabilities. So how can I use them in a way that's not just, the guy that comes into the company and his first week, he's just like, hey, don't like these processes. Like, what are we doing? And you immediately tune that guy out because he hasn't proved anything, because he hasn't done anything at the company. He hasn't brought in any revenue. And so his opinions have no weight. So as a freshman, how do you utilize your leadership abilities? And I think Luke Goody did such a good job picking his spots. And I'm not there at practice, so I don't know. I could just be overreacting from what I saw on the screen. But huddling guys up, encouraging guys. Georgie's gone. Georgie was like the master encourager. He's gone. Somebody's got to be that guy. When Curbelo is, he was palms up most of the game. He was kind of in his own world. He siloed off after he started making a couple turnovers and had some fouls. Kofi, although he can be vocal, like that may not be more of his nature. Granison, not really his nature. He leads more by just playing hard. But you can see Luke Goody he's vocal. And he's vocal as a freshman, and you have to have confidence to do that. And the other side of it is not only just being vocal and having confidence being vocal and huddling guys up. It's guys being receptive to it.
Yeah.
And they look receptive to it. And the only way that you can make guys receptive to it as a freshman is if you do your job, you play hard, and you're about the team. And if you're those three things, because if you're always in the wrong spot, if you're not playing hard, and if you're a self-absorbed guy, your opinion will hold zero weight.
Yeah. Ever.
And that's not just basketball. That's not just sports. That's all over the place. That's in relationships. That's in, that's in the workforce. That's in wherever you go. Your opinions and your leadership has way more credibility when you are doing the right things. And when Luke Goody comes onto the court, he's in the right spot. He's playing his butt off. He's slamming his head off the ground, flying in for a rebound. So he can do those things. Now, he's not going to berate a guy, an upperclassman in practice. There's a fine line, but little things like huddling guys up, being vocal, like those are ways to flex your leadership, capabilities in a way that isn't trying to make it about yourself. And I was just so impressed with it because I know it's hard. It's really hard. Think about a high schooler that, you're on the freshman team to start. So it's guys your age and you're the leader. And then you can move up to JV and you're a leader. And then you move up to varsity and you're the leader. And then all of a sudden you go to college and you're a freshman, you're the bottom of the totem pole. So how do you manage that? And for a lot of guys, that confidence that they have comes from being a leader, comes from the external stuff. And when you're freshman year, you're spending a lot more time internal. And that's where your confidence can waver. So he's finding ways to pick his spots. And I think it's tremendous. And I think it bodes well for Illinois moving forward because you have a guy that is a foundation there.
And Melendez, man, like I hope he understands that's his path to the court is defense, because as we've talked about before, like what they lack is length and athleticism on the wing. And I don't know if he's going to earn playing time this year, but if you want to get on the court this year, next year, Mike, like that is your path, is doing that. And then the offense will come because we know he's talented.
Melendez, I've been really impressed with, he gets in there and at first you're like I said, it kind of looks like almost a baby deer in a sense, where he's just kind of thrown into the fire, and it almost looks like his I guess he's kind of raw in a way, but he uses his length so well. He's a relatively fluid athlete, and the telltale sign was a lot of guys defensively, especially if you're a freshman, when you first get in there, you don't want to foul, you don't want to make a mistake, but that first steal that he had, the second that guy got that ball and tried to rip through, he stuck his hand in there to grab it and pull it out. And that alone shows that he's willing to get in there. He's willing to mix it up. And, it obviously ignited fast break. And then he came down, had a really great, they call it range rebounds, where, you're getting a rebound that's out of your range, but you can go and get it. And that's what length does. And I think, he had a three that went off the side of the backboard, but I'll give him credit too on the offensive end. He had multiple times where he got behind the defense. Curbelo found him, layup at the end of the half. He did it again in the second half, where he didn't catch it cleanly, or else it would have been a layup. But he does so many good little things, and Goody does too. And I thought Podziemski too came in and at least handled pressure, because we mentioned the question mark with who's going to handle things. And he has a tendency at times to just resort to, spin dribble, spin dribble, spin dribble. And if you're a guy that's going to start offense, you can't go 6 spin dribbles deep and then get into offense, because you've probably wasted 10 seconds. So I think Podziemski can take another step by just, here's my move and I'm gone. And I'm going by my guy, and then I can get us into stuff. But he's not shy. He had a couple catch and shoot threes where, especially in the first half, I was like, whoa, he just caught it and let it rip. I mean, he's a natural scorer. So I think all three guys have shown great things, relative to what they can bring to this team. And those are things that you can build on.
Yeah. I don't think we got to break down like Alfonso Plummer. He can shoot. The thing we got to bring up, and we're going to break this down in our VIP film room, Mike, so we can dive more into it there. But Andre Curbelo, 15 turnovers in 58 minutes. He also, I believe, has 17 assists, right? So he's still a positive assist to turnover ratio despite 15 turnovers in 2 games. What did you see especially against Indiana PA? Because he dominated some of that part of that game in a good way, and then he dominated some of that game in a bad way.
Let's unpack this.
Let's.
The first thing I'll say is that there are very few people, and I'm not going to explain away. I'll start off by saying I'm not going to explain away 10 turnovers. I'm not going to justify 10 turnovers. But I will make the point that it's very, very hard to have a 10 turnover game and still do enough to make up for 10 turnovers. And he did. To me, offensively, the defensive end's a different story, but offensively, it's not even close, the good to bad. It's not close. The gravity that he commands from the opposing defense, the looks that he gives, because here's the reality. He had 12 assists, and he could have sleptwalked into 18 or 19. There were point blank layups that guys missed. And then he was the one facilitating a lot of those open Grandison Hawkins threes that if half of those go in, you're looking at 20 assists, 10 turnovers. You're looking at 18. Like, that is not, I'm not speaking in hyperbole. Like, he could have very easily had 18 assists in that game.
Well, and how many of those points does he get credit for the Coleman Hawkins? Like, Coleman Hawkins was sprinting down court, which good. You should when you have Curbelo, but 10 of his points were off. Like, that's why, like, even though he had, I think, 5 or 6 turnovers in the first half, he was my star of the game before Kofi went off, just because there was bad, but like, he dominated that game.
Yeah, he did
with those turnovers.
He did. And I think what you have to understand, especially when you talk about turnovers, it's not a one size fits all scale. It's just not. 4 turnovers for Alfonso Plummer are different than 4 turnovers for Andre Curbelo. Right. 4 turnovers for Alfonso Plummer is inexcusable.
What's the record usage rate you've ever seen? Because I thought Curbelo had it the other night. Like, no one else was handling the ball.
For a seat, when I was breaking down the film, I was like, this may be an hour and a half edit, because he has the ball in his hands every single possession. I know Trae Young was 37, I think 37.8 for, and you led me right into it because I was going to make the Trae Young comparison. And I'll first start by saying that turnovers are not created equally. Usage factors in. And I know like usage becomes this hot button topic of like, oh, like usage percentage and this and that, but it's true. Like it's different. And when you look at Andre Curbelo, and just for context, when you look at usage percentage, when I say 37% for Trae Young, when I say 29% for Ayo Dosunmu, 28% for Kofi Cockburn, 24% for Andre Curbelo last year, which is insane. The way that they factor in usage percentage is basically any play that you're involved in where you end with a field goal attempt, a free throw attempt, or a turnover. So if you can think about it, Kobe Bryant, I think 1 year in the NBA had 38% usage rate. Whereas a guy like Ricky Rubio, and we made this comparison for a guy like Andre Curbelo before, he is going to have a lower usage rate because they aren't factoring that you are passing to a guy that gets a field goal attempt, that you're passing to a guy that gets fouled. So it's different. But I still think this year, Andre Curbelo is going to be in the 30s. Like he's going to be in the 30s. Trae Young was 37%. And
can I make this point? Trae's
go ahead.
Turnovers per game that year, 5.9.
I'll take it a step further. This is to give anybody context. And I'm not debating who the better scorer is because Trae Young is a generational talent when it comes to scoring in college basketball. But Trae Young, games of 6+ turnovers. He played 32 games. Okay. Mm-hmm. Trae Young had 19 games of 6+ turnovers. 19. He had 4 games of 8+ turnovers. He had a night where he had 9 turnovers and followed that up with a night of 12 turnovers against Chester Frazier's Kansas State Wildcats. So Andre Curbelo is going to turn the ball over. And the bigger point that I want to make is it's not about the mistake. It's not about the mistake itself. He's going to have turnovers. It's the compounded mistakes. And that's where I think he can make an improvement. It's turning your turnover into a foul and then a turnover again. And if you watch that game against IUP, he played 33 minutes. And if you want to say half and half, okay, 16 and a half minutes, he was on offense. 4 of those maybe were him kind of, turning it over. But he played, 12, 13 more minutes offensively of really, really good basketball. And to me, you look at it and it's just, I made the point about Alfonso Plummer. 4 turnovers for Alfonso Plummer is different than 4 turnovers for Trae Young or for Andre Curbelo. But back to the Trae Young thing. Yes, Trae Young had 19 games of 6+ turnovers. He had 4 games of 8+ turnovers. He had a lot that were kind of in that 6-7 range. But how many games did Trae Young have of 5 or less assists? Or I guess less than 5 assists. How many games of less than 5 assists did Trae Young have out of 32 games the year he played? 1. And I think Andre Curbelo is going to be on that same trajectory where he had, if you go back and watch the film, there was about 16 minutes and 40 seconds left in the first half. We hadn't even made it to the first media yet. And if it wasn't for a missed Jacob Grandison layup, Andre Curbelo would have 6 assists. That's insanity. Yeah. And 1 turnover at that point. So he's very capable. Like I'm a firm believer. You're going to see games of 13 assists, 3 turnovers this year. 9 assists, 2 turnovers. But you're also going to have 11 assists, 8 turnovers. 11 assists, but think about the points that he's generating. And when you look at turnovers, not all turnovers are the same either. Is it a dead ball turnover? Can you set your defense? Is it a live ball turnover? Coaches always preach you want to limit live ball turnovers. And if I go back and think he had 10 turnovers in this game, I'll give him, he probably had 7. 3, I think, were maybe on other people, but it doesn't matter. Aaron Rodgers throws it to Equanimeous St. Brown over the middle, and it goes off his hands. It's a pick on Aaron Rodgers. Right. So it's still 10 turnovers, but how many of those are live ball turnovers? And he got up in the air on one in the first half. He tried to split a double team in the first half, and then he did it again in the second half. And I think he maybe had 3 live ball turnovers. The other ones were more dead ball, which, Andre Curbelo isn't out there like, okay, if I'm going to turn it over, it's got to be a dead ball turnover. But, those are ones that don't kill you. So now you factor in, 7 dead ball turnovers, which basically the same as a missed shot or an air ball out of bounds. You can set your defense, and then you factor in he had 12 assists. So, and very easily, like I said, could have had 16, 17, 18, 19 assists. So I'm not worried at all. I don't think there's any cause for concern with Andre Curbelo. What I will say is that defensively is a different story.
Yeah.
And I think what you see now, and Io fell into this a little bit last year too. When you are a high usage guy offensively, it is human nature at times to take a breather defensively. And that's when you open yourself up to being out of position, to getting back cut. And Andre Curbelo got back cut 3 or 4 times in that game. He got back cut against St. Francis too. But there's ways to combat it. Defense isn't just, an all or nothing thing where it's either you're flying around trying to get steals and gaps or you're just standing there doing nothing. But the way that Andre Curbelo can make an impact and be the guy that can be high usage offensively and also on defense be a good defender is to be a really good positional defender. And when I say positional defender, you are in the right spot. And it takes focus. It's much easier said than done, but you're in the right spot. If you're at least in the right spot, then you're not late on closeouts. You're not in a position where you're out of position, because a lot of times I'd say 75% of fouls on the defensive end are because the offense created some sort of advantage and you were at a disadvantage or you were out of position. So if you can get into position, then on skip passes, you're there on a closeout. On drives, you're head up, you can guard, and you limit these fouls of having to run around and get back in front of a guy or try to go contest late and you foul. Like that's where he got a lot of his fouls during the game. So we're talking about a preseason All-American for, according to some publications, and you're talking about a preseason All-Big Ten guy. And there is so much more for him to improve on, which is scary.
Yeah.
And I think those are things that as he gets better at those, this team is going to hit a point where they're going to be virtually unstoppable offensively if he can continue to shore up those turnovers. But turnovers are going to happen. I'm here to tell you that turnovers are going to happen.
A 4 or 5 turnover night is not bad for him. Like that's not a bad night. Like, so you almost have to recalibrate as a fan or an observer that's not a bad night. Like Cassius had a bunch of those. Io had a bunch of those, right? Like it's when you get over that 5 mark where he's like, okay, yeah, there's probably some that are, a little careless here, but I agree with you. I think it's when he compounds his mistakes and he certainly was frustrated. All right, Mike, before we end the pod, I want to ask you, first game of the season, Jackson State. Typical tune-up game. This team's projected 290 to 300, but there's always some nerves. It's first game. What is a first game like for you guys as players, and what do you want to see from Illinois, especially without Kofi Cockburn on the court?
Yeah, I had the full range of first games in my career. In my freshman year, we played Colgate, who was actually really solid that year. Had some good players. They kept it close in the first half. We were able to pull away. And then you get to sophomore year, we played Coppin State and won by, or actually no, sophomore year Coppin State won by 1 million, or maybe that was junior year. Regardless, these games you're trying to get your feet wet, like I say, and I always go back to it. It's always just the foundation of it. I mentioned it with the Drexel game. There's no 50-point shot. They're just like, it isn't. And I know that you want to handle a team like this and you want to go out there and get up 20-4 and run away with it early and put it away early and step on their neck. But you really have to take it one possession at a time. Okay. Where can we find the high percentage shot? Great. Cool. Let's go to the defensive end. Where can we force low percentage shots? And then that's the game plan. Like that is what you were doing. And if you can stack that every possession, the score kind of becomes obsolete. The score will take care of itself. That's when you all of a sudden look up and you're like, oh, we're up 30-8. and it's rarely because you just come out firing. You're just getting high percentage shots and you're getting stops on the defensive end. So I'm interested to see how they come out. There's another wrinkle to it with Kofi being out, but not to look ahead, but even Arkansas State.
Yep.
In game 2, you got the preseason Sun Belt Player of the Year. Desi Sills transfers from Arkansas. Like they're a good team. And that's going to be a good test for those guys, especially when you have, their preseason Sun Belt Player of the Year is a big. So it's Coleman Hawkins, Omar, like, what do you got? How can we stop these guys? Because it's going to be a common theme throughout the season, especially in the Big Ten. So you want to see at least, forget the score, forget what the score ends up being. You win by 30, you win by 40, you win by 18, whatever it may be. You can't come out as flat as you did against IUP. I think as a coach, you just look at, and even as a player, you're looking at your teammates, you're like, playing your butts off in this game, and the rest will truly take care of itself. So I think if you're Brad Underwood, that's the one thing you want to see is like, how much are we competing? And is it every possession? And I think if you can take care of those things, like I said, the score ends up just kind of taking care of itself.
What do you think practice was like the last week for those guys?
I want to sit here and say loud, but this is a mature team. This is an older team, and I think it would be a different story. And I think Jacob Grandison touched on it in the press conference. They knew this wasn't like, "Hey, coach, why are you yelling at us? We won by 18. Like, what's going on?" Like they knew that they didn't play up to their standards, and that's great. That's great to have a team that recognizes those things, because and especially having the taste that you had in your mouth after last March, like good isn't good enough. Sometimes great isn't good enough. Like there needs to be a certain excellence to every single time you take the floor. So I'm really looking forward to see how they can bounce back because there's a lot of elements you can look at. There's the Kofi thing. There's Curbelo bouncing back from a 10 turnover game. There's guys that I thought probably could have played harder, not coming out flat. So how do you do that in a season opener, and what does that look like? So I think that they can check all those boxes. They're going to put themselves in a really good position night one.
Well, Mike, next week we'll have some games to break down, some Kofi Cockburn-less games to break down as well to see how these guys respond. Looking forward to it, man. Appreciate the time and insight as always.
Appreciate it, man.